Good morning. We will call the Planning and Zoning meeting for Wednesday, January 17th, 2024 to order. Let the record show we are absent two commissioners, Ms. Cattermas and Mr. Johansson. The first item this morning would be our opening ceremonies, Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, the first item this morning is our order of business. Is there any changes or corrections to our order of business this morning?
Good morning, Commissioner Franchek, or Frederick. There's no changes to the order of business.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Salucek. Hearing no changes, do I have a motion to approve the order of business?
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 2 this morning is the minutes of our previous session, the December 20th meeting. Any corrections to those minutes or concerns? If not, I would look for a motion to approve.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. All right. First item on our regular agenda this morning is the appointment of the chairman for 2024. I guess I don't recall the process. Do you guys know how that?
Mr. Chairman, I'll weigh in on that one. I think in this point, what we would do is call for nominations for the chairman, would take a second on that, and then we would take a vote.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Wanko. I guess
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to elect Jason Frederick as chairman.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second for the first appointment of Jason Frederick. Is there any other nominations? Is there any other nominations? Okay, hearing no other nominations, we will close the nominations. We have a motion and a second to appoint myself, Mr. Frederick, as chairman for 2024. And a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And then item B this morning would be to appoint the vice chairman for 2024. I will open nominations.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a nomination for Scott Bullinger to be appointed vice chair for 2024.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to appoint Mr. Bullinger as the vice chairman. Is there any other nominations? Any other nominations for the vice chairman position? Hearing none, we will close nominations. We do have a motion and a second for Mr. Bullinger to be appointed for 2024. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Okay, we will move on to item C this morning. This is special use permit SUP-001-2024. This is to consider a special use permit to allow for a heavy industrial use American pulverizer car shredder in the general industrial zoning district. The property is legally described as Lot 6, Block 2, Energy Center First Subdivision, City of Dickinson, Starr County, North Dakota. The property is located within the City of Dickinson. Mr. Galbert.
Good morning, Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Matthew Galabert. I am the city planner for the City of Dickinson. Before you use a special use permit to allow a American pulverizer car shredder to be located on the subject property. I will let the applicants who are here today speak a bit more about the purpose and operations of that. They also have their environmental engineering consultant on the call here. So I will not get too much into the details there, but my understanding here is that they will be pooling resources, whatever they would be, white goods and vehicles, abandoned, whatever it is, to process them on site. I imagine that this would be both local materials and also regional and out of state. That's how it's been described so far. So it's a little hard to understand how much of that would be kind of cleaning up what we have here in our stockyards versus how much would we be bringing into the community to then process and then ship out. So that's a big question mark. And it also has an impact on the understanding of how this would work out for our local economics. And that is another big question mark because it's very difficult for us to understand if this is something that's going to be a net good, economically speaking, because that would be one way to justify something like this, where it is going to be a bit subjectively outside of staff's expertise. So on that note, it is a little difficult to say that this would necessarily improve, for example, tax revenues, which could then become a community good indirectly. But it's also difficult to say whether or to what degree this could be a good or service for the community to actually bring stuff there. So I'll let them also speak about that. Then there's another matter of the landfill. This would be significant equipment after it's processed to then take over there. So far Public Works has not really shared any concerns whatsoever about that, but it seems in the long run that would probably have an impact. So I've received a comment from the next door neighbors, and they are concerned about the quality of life that they currently have. They have submitted complaints here and there over the years. They had been in the location prior to annexation, prior to zoning, is my understanding, and have been communicating with the applicant and the city off and on over those years to try to figure out some kind of way to settle their quality of life issues without relocating necessarily, or if they were to relocate, it would probably require enough financial help to actually purchase a home in the community with maintaining a similar quality of life, rather than, say, the real estate value of the property as it is now, which probably could not, be traded in for a different location house of similar standard. So that is a real issue there. They are legally non-conforming. I believe that there is time and room for negotiation here between the applicant and the concerned members of the public. I have not received any other complaints other than that. And so with that, staff is not recommending necessarily approval nor denial because there are too many lingering questions at this moment, and it would require probably at least a few more weeks of analysis to give something that we can stand behind in terms of a recommendation. But if this is something that the Planning and Zoning Board would like to consider now and possibly approve, then I guess I would just leave it there. Otherwise, I guess it would be up to the applicant or the board if you would like to give this more time.
My first question, I guess, for staff is, what in our code, because I had a hard time finding it, triggered a special use permit in the first place?
So this would be considered a heavy industrial land use. And so
But
even,
it was heavy industrial prior to that.
sorry?
I mean,
Yes.
I've just never seen us have to have a special use permit to add a piece of equipment to an existing operation. So,
That's a valid point. Probably what's already existing would have required a special use permit if it was noticed. It also would depend on the people at the time when this was established. This has been, they've been using, or this land has been used for this prior to the Robertson's metal recycling. And so there should probably be a special use permit in place for heavy industry because processing cars is frankly heavy industry. At this point, they're intensifying further, so it's probably a good moment to take a look at it and consider what we want to do. So it's not going to get to this point unless it's satisfying all of the basic criteria of what would be legally allowed.
What
When is-
I'm asking, Mr. Gallagher, is what in our code is triggering a special use permit? What section in our code is triggering a special use permit?
That would be table 4.2, which is
I mean,
basically
is that included in here?
in the staff report.
Yes.
No, it is not. So table
So
4.
can you tell me what table 4.2 says?
Table 4.2 is it's a matrix which shows whether something is permitted or requires a special use permit per zoning district. So heavy industry is one of the horizontal lines in there. And so in any industrial zoning district, heavy industry is going to need a special use permit and to be considered by the city commission.
So if they wanted to cite this today in that location, they were a new business, that would trigger that. But since it's already cited, adding a new piece of equipment, I mean, every business there's new technology, there's innovation, and they add piece of equipment. I just don't, sitting on this board for as long as I have, I've never seen a time that we've actually requested a special use permit for a new piece of equipment to be cited on an existing business. So I'm trying to understand, because I could not find it in our code where that says that I mean, are they changing their operation? That's my next question. Do they crush cars there now?
I would probably let the applicant answer that more accurately. It seems to me that if they're going to install a 100 by 50 foot apparatus to do this, it would be a sizable upscaling of the operations.
But does upscaling trigger a special use permit
Yes.
in our code?
So, for example, if we have a dry cleaning establishment and they've been there and they want to expand and add a bunch of perk equipment and stuff that could possibly affect the nearby community, at that point, we would probably ask them to submit for a special use permit to be considered, as an example.
And our code triggers that, you're telling me? I could not find it, so that's where my questions are coming from.
I don't believe there's any specific provision in the zoning code that says if you intensify something that's already existing, you'll need a special use permit. It's more if any land use or any operations would fall under a category of a special use permit, then it would need to be considered. So in this case, it's kind of a bit neither here nor there, because if we just say that before the scrapyard didn't need a special use permit, it wouldn't really change the facts on the ground today if they were to intensify to a substantial degree. So it's really kind of up to the board whether to approve it or not. But we'll bring special use permits to you if they just fit any criteria that would deem it so. It's basically just the land use on the zoning district and the intensity of it. So it's really, in this case, just a matter of the intensification.
I go by our ordinance. That's what we're governed by,
Mhm.
what the city commission has approved. You still haven't explained to me what part of our ordinance is triggering a special use permit. You're
So-
saying the table in 4.2, but intensifying, I could not find anywhere that it says if you intensify your business, you have to have a special use permit. So I'm trying to understand, before we get all into talking to them and everything, what, is it your opinion? Is it Josh's opinion? Is it staff's? That
This would be,
I
sorry.
mean, opinion to me does not matter here. It's black and white in the code. So I need to understand in our code where this triggers a special use permit.
So that would still be table 4.2. There is, in that matrix, and I'll provide this after the meeting, it simply shows that heavy industry requires a special use permit in GI.
I understand heavy industry requires a special use permit, but they're already established. And all they are is adding a piece of equipment. If they were citing this today, I would agree with you. If they were gonna come in and say, I'm gonna build this new facility, I agree with you. 4.2 would probably say, yes, they would need a special use permit. But adding a piece of equipment to an existing operation, I do not understand in our code or see it anywhere that I could find that triggers a special use permit. And that's what I'm trying to understand right now.
I would just say that I'm providing you a pretty objective interpretation of the code and the opinions and subjective analysis on whether it's something that should just be approved. That would be up to the board. So if I take an objective look at the zoning code, I would say that this does need to reach you and be considered.
So it's your opinion then.
That would be my professional recommendation based on my interpretation of the code.
All right, understand.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr.
is it
Ball.
currently considered heavy industrial?
If you were to ask my staff opinion, this would be considered heavy industry without the addition of the American
Current state?
Pulverizer.
Okay.
And the other reason I'm asking, I mean, I did talk to building and codes. I mean, adding this piece of equipment, I mean, doesn't even trigger a building permit with the building code. So I'm just trying to understand why we're here today.
Well, if it is something that needs a building permit, also is not necessarily something that matters with a special use permit either. It's more about what is being done on the subject property.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Steve Josephson, planner. I just wanted to add this. There was staff discussion about this. The current machine, the machine that's being brought in has more intensive uses. I think what happened was when the city engineer reviewed the site plan for it, he saw that what was holding it down was being built for a higher level of vibration that would happen. And upon researching this, that this machine would create more vibrations and noise. And those are the things that if you go to 39.2, which is the list of uses, of use types for heavy industry, that's what distinguishes heavy industry from other industrial uses, is anything where there's in the running of it, you're creating greater vibrations, greater noise, greater the possibility of explosions and flammable chemicals and so on. So that's, based upon that site plan and finding out more about this machine, that this is actually has the potential to create more impacts than the current car crusher that's out there right now. That's why this special use permit is in today.
Okay.
It's a different operation than the shredder that's already there. The impacts are anticipated to be much greater in terms of noise and vibration, and also the potential for explosion when crushing the cars. And that was something that staff did discuss
And
before requesting that the applicants come forward with a special use permit.
I did see articles of impact on this machine, but I did not see any technical specifications on the machine submitted in our packet. Do we have them? Have we reviewed them?
What was submitted in the packets, what's included in, what was included to us? I mean, we shared what we have, and so.
I mean, the only thing I see here is some articles that I would imagine were submitted by the party that is not in favor of us approving this. Did I miss it? Because if I click on the links on the application, I don't get anything, so all I get is whoops, jot form.
So the specs for the equipment, again, I would probably defer to the applicant. We did receive some brochure materials which were added to the packet, but other than that, tried to get in touch with American Pulverizer a few times, so far unsuccessfully. So there simply hasn't been all that much time to really gather a lot of the facts in this case. I think we've been working on this for just 2.5, 3 weeks after it was submitted. And if you would like to have some more details and follow up regarding the specs and environmental impacts, for example, or what the operations necessarily would be, I would say probably who we have here at this public meeting today could probably provide that information. But otherwise, if you would like more details, then you would probably maybe consider tabling this for the next month, but that would ultimately be up to you and the applicant, depending on how much information you would like to have before making a decision.
I was just gonna add that the specs for this actually came in before, and were being reviewed before the applicants put in a special use permit.
Yeah.
And Mr. Skluzacek was the one who had reviewed this, and we started having a discussion about whether this was just a typical car shredder, or whether this was something that would create impacts, vibration and noise impacts greater than the operation that's already there right now.
Okay. Well, we didn't get those in our packet, so.
Understood.
Do you see the one that says acoustic sound?
Yeah, if I click on it, it says,
No, it's on the actual packet. It'll say acoustic block sound suppression PDF. It's right under the letter. That's not in their application, but just on the packet.
yeah, that's just the fencing though.
I don't know, that's all that.
That has nothing to do with the actual machine itself. I did see that. I mean, have we, as staff, reviewed the equipment and the technical specifications?
Yeah, we looked at that acoustic sound suppression document, which is attached. I'm not sure if you're not able to open that. There was also a geotechnical report provided
Yeah.
from the applicant that was reviewed. And then there was also a pre-application meeting where some additional kind of site plan related topics and discussions occurred. And so based on that, and then some additional research on trying to understand noise, dust, and some other neighboring concerns and whatnot. And that's where, and I was just looking through in our ordinance, I had that up a bit ago, but where it talks about, additional industrial purposes and when you have additional circumstances where where was that now? There's a discussion about adding noise and dust and some of those kind of things. So that's what, going back to the special use permit topic, that's where we were coming from.
Well, and that's where I go back to the technical specs of the actual machine. I mean, how noisy is it when it's running?
So with the actual machine minus, then they're gonna put in some, it'd be like a sound reduction panel. And so ultimately, the understanding is it's supposed to be under the decibel limits according to our city ordinance. And vibrations associated with the foundation are supposed to keep the vibration levels down to a reasonable level that won't impact neighboring properties or anything like that, so.
Okay, and then, did we look up a history of the subject property and the neighbor's property? I mean, from everything I can see, their properties are zone GI also. I mean, when we annexed that, did we force GI on them, or
So
did
that
they actually
history-
ask for GI?
It's a bit difficult to tease out what exactly went on there because it's about 40 years in the making. So the home was built in 1927, far preceding annexation. We would have to go look at deed records to see when exactly those neighbors moved in, but they have at least suggested that it was well before it was rezoned.
My question is their their property is GI also, is it not?
Right.
The way I understand, I mean, typically, we don't just go force GI on somebody if they have a home there. So did this person that's against the special use permit come to us at one time and ask us to rezone their land to GI so they could sell off a portion of some of it to some of the other things that are around there?
You're speaking of the residential neighbors still, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say because there used to be a heavier hand in rezoning from the city side. Typically in American cities, during kind of the height of this Euclidean zoning, where when they did a prior comprehensive plan, they probably established this whole area as industrial zoning for the future. And then it would be possible for the city to then go in and with city commission's approval, do an entire neighborhood with a different zone, which is what you would probably see. That's probably the history along Villard and in the downtown district as well. And that means that all of those properties that would be residential and then get rezoned, while the intention would be basically multi-generational transformation, the people there, they still have their house, and maybe someday it'll work out better, but in the meantime, they have the right to hold on to that for as long as they like. It means that they're legally non-conforming. So they, in a sense, are accepting that whatever happens around them, that's just the reality that they're gonna have to live with. Otherwise, they would have had to protest it at that time. Really don't have any documentation regarding that rezone application or how that occurred.
You can understand how that history would be important in this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they didn't protest it, or they actually asked to be rezoned GI'd for another reason, to sell off maybe a parcel of property to another one of the several businesses that are located along that road, would make a pretty big difference in our decision-making. Would you not think that?
I would definitely agree. The best data that we have would honestly at this point be the word of the public complaining at this moment. We really don't have the documentation from whenever that occurred to say whether they even protested or not.
Do we know when?
Sorry?
Do we know when?
When I spoke on the phone with them, they said back in the 80s they spoke with the city, and then when Robertson's Metal Recycling moved in, that they cleaned up their operations and they have been better neighbors than what was there prior. But it seems to me that this just kind of evolved over a few decades into the situation that they have now, and they've just never wanted to leave. I don't really know if they protested or not at the time that zoning district changed, but I would think that even if they did, it would have been rezoned anyway, because that would have resulted in one residential lot in the middle of general industrial zoning district, which is something that we can't do. That would basically amount to spot zoning.
No, I'm sorry. Generally, what happens, commissioners, is when a piece of property is annexed, under the Century Code, when a piece of property is annexed from the county into the city will look at whatever the zoning was, and, and find something that matches in the city's. They'll look at the county's code and look at and try to match something that's in the city. That may have happened, or when the zoning code, it was adopted in 1999, and the new zoning map, there was a new zoning map that came with it, and there have been instances, I've got to tell you, there have been instances elsewhere where properties are in use for one thing, like residential, and then they were rezoned when that zoning map was adopted back in 1999 for example, for commercial uses. Can't really speak to this property. I'm not even sure where that is. I'm just saying this is what's happened generally in the past.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Josephson. Commissioners, anyone else have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, the applicant property is the blue outlined. It's currently not in use, is that right? And it's between Robertson's Metal Recycling and the home, the residential, is that right?
It depends on what map you're looking at. I'm looking at a different map.
I'm
and
looking
it's-
at
It is in
Google.
use.
It is, okay.
Yep. So it depends on, I guess, I don't know if it's been cleaned up or it has been in use at one point in time, I guess, from what I see.
So all the way from 28th Avenue to the residential property is Robertson's Metal Recycling.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
I think that they would need to answer your question
Okay.
regarding how they're using this property now.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? If not, we will hear from the applicant.
I think the only thing I wanted to clarify is prior to Robertson's, this was GI, and it was being utilized as GI for the city. That's what we think.
Correct.
But currently, we view it as, it is GI, but you believe, and I think our terminology, they crush cars there, or they shred cars there currently? Just crush?
The brochure for the
adding a
apparatus
shredder?
says shred.
That they're adding a shredder, but there's no current shredder there. They just do crushing and dismantling and stuff.
I don't want to
Is that
misspeak for the applicant, but I believe,
And I can ask them when they come up. But,
I'm Daniel Robertson.
okay.
And I'm Reginald Robertson. Daniel is the manager of the business. I'm the president of our Robertson Metal LLC. And yes, we process car bodies currently. We have processed car bodies.
Okay.
We have been in the Dickinson yard since November of 2015. During that time, we have processed over 173,000 tons of ferrous material, which includes, we've done everything from oil rigs and oil field tanks to household appliances and everything in between. Basically, anything made out of metals we can recycle. And currently the biggest machine we have in the yard is we call it a guillotine shear, but it's a squeeze box. It can be used to bale metals, or it can be used to densify the metals and then press them through a guillotine shear and chop it into small pieces. And we've been doing this now the full 8 years in Dickinson. And
Okay.
prior to that, it was a scrap yard. I believe Continental Metals started in the early 90s, and it's been a scrap yard since the early 90s.
Okay.
So the only change is the type of equipment that we'd use to process this material that would naturally increase our production and allow us to process it a little quicker. But I'd like to point out with the letters that I submitted this morning that we didn't start this on the sly. We started this in the open. We came to building and codes and requested, a permit, and they said we didn't need a permit. And we also hired the environmental consultants early in '23 to make sure that we were complying with all of the state and local rules and regulations regarding air quality and health environments. And it's only in '23 that the city, that I understand, that the city came up with this process for a special use permit. And we weren't contacted by the city about a requirement for this special use process until November of '23. So the city is actually the one that's kind of behind on this. We've been working on this since early in '22. We have spent to date about $2.4 million in getting ready for this shredder. And we have equipment scheduled to start coming in. We just received 1 truckload of the electrical components, and we'll start receiving like the electric motor and the VFD that will control it. And then the shredder itself will come in by the end of February, I believe. So we're kind of in an urgent need for clarification on this, because we started early on this, and now actually the system has kind of changed on us. But we really aren't doing anything different. And we're trying to put in place things, we realize there'll be some dust from this, and there'll be some noise and some vibration. But the machine is being built with an automatic water suppression system to help control dust. And if that doesn't work, we'll put other things in place to control the dust. We don't have any intentions of causing health problems with anybody in the community. The vibration, when these shredders were first built 40, 50 years ago, they didn't have vibration springs. They're now building with vibration springs, which does a considerable amount to dampen the vibration. And as a comparison, a couple hundred yards south of us is the main line of the BN Railroad, which is running pretty heavy trains through there several times a day. And I believe that this shredder is not going to create nearly as much vibration as that railroad already does. And as far as noise, we have in place some stuff to control the noise. You had a question about the noise level, and what I understand is it could reach 120 dB right at the shredder. But I've been in the scrap metal business since '77, and I've delivered material to shredders, and I've been backed up unloading car bodies right next to shredders while they're running. And the noise is not, it's not that excessive. Some of the concerns that the city, and we're pointed these things out, some of the concerns is an occasional explosion. And where those come from, if somebody sneaks a propane tank into a car body, then that could actually explode when it hits the hammers. So we have to have in place a detailed examination of the material that we put in. We have to make sure there's no batteries, there's no gas tanks, there's no sealed containers, or even too heavy a material could cause a problem. So we have already developed a plan to examine this stuff before we feed the shredder, which would minimize this. And as a comparison, we wind up with propane tanks now constantly coming in the scrap. And we have a system to watch for these things. And in 8 years, we've never had a problem with a propane tank. Because if they accidentally got into that squeeze box guillotine shear, they could explode in that. And we are careful to watch for that stuff, and we haven't had those issues. So it's not that you can't have problems with these machines, it's the management and the operation of them that minimizes this stuff and allows us to operate in a safe manner.
So explain how the shredder is different than from what you're doing now, a little bit.
You want to explain that for?
Well, currently we're shearing and baling, and the shredder's
So you're
got
crushing in your
and
big
shearing.
chunks and then you shear them up.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that.
The shredder is basically a hammer mill that liberates and cleans up the material a little better. So the material enters into the shredding chamber of the shredder, and the shredding chamber is grates inside it, so the hammers just chew everything up and get it small enough to fit through the grate. And then there's a takeaway conveyor that goes to a set of drum magnets and pulls the ferrous, and then the ferrous then goes to a picking conveyor where you hand pick electric motors and different pieces of copper that would be entangled in the ferrous. And then from there, the shredded material is ready to sell. And the non-ferrous and the waste is combined at that point, and it goes up another conveyor, and then we'll run that across an eddy current, which will actually repel any conductive material out of the waste stream. And then the waste then is ready to go to a landfill.
And you utilize our landfill for that.
If they want the material. If they don't want the material, we've talked to people in Williston and potentially Bismarck and Fargo. We're gonna be sending trucks to bring the material in potentially, so we could take waste to these other landfills.
And I think you guys take like our appliances and stuff from our
We
landfill,
do,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
this fluff or waste from a shredder is often beneficial to a landfill depending on either design, because most landfills have a clay lining and then a plastic liner in the bottom. And one of the important things is not to penetrate that plastic liner and cause a landfill to leak. And what they found out that this fluff layered in a couple of feet thick in the bottom of a landfill is almost impenetrable, that it'll protect the lining of a landfill. And then it can also be used as daily cover, where you have to cover the landfill with a certain amount of cover every day. This also complies with that in a lot of landfill situations. So it really shouldn't be looked at as a liability. It can be a benefit to a landfill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robertson. Any other questions, staff?
I have
For-
one.
for-
In regards to comparison, if it's possible, the sound comparison between what you guys do now and what the shredder will put out, can you put that on a scale, like of 1 to 10? Let's say your squeeze box is a 7 and you have a shredder, would that be like right around the same with what you guys are going to be doing for preventative,
I
or?
think it would be pretty similar
The biggest difference is the size of it. We have equipment now that produces 110 to 120 dB, but it doesn't travel that far. And so I think personally the biggest difference in this is going to be the volume based on the size of the machine. And for that reason, we have plans to erect, we're going to use belting from the coal mines, this heavy conveyor belting. And we're going to put up a first layer of defense on the noise, a 40-foot barrier with that. And then was this acoustic fence, which has been developed over the last few years and has been proven to reduce noise levels by as much as 30 dB. And we use that on the outside of it. And then as the final thing is we're having an engineered design to build a 20-foot fence completely around the property, so that our hopes and intentions are that we completely eliminate any noise level above what the city's acceptable standards are.
I had a question. We were talking about the west side of the railroad tracks, or that spur that comes through. I know, I'm trying to think, you guys currently have that fenced in and are using that portion? Because I'm
Yeah.
looking at two different maps, and
Yeah.
one shows that it's not being used and one shows that it is being
Yeah.
used.
We are
and
using
so,
it. Yeah.
okay. And that's currently filled with material, I assume.
Well, we've taken a lot out in preparation because we poured this slab for the base for the shredder machine itself. And we did clean up a lot of material that was in there, but we were using that. We had mobile shears in there, shearing material and stockpiling certain things. So, but yeah, the yard has been active for the last 8 years.
Over the years you guys have been operating, have you ever been in violation of any noise or air quality
We had some-
regulations?
We had some complaints about noise, but it turned out that they were unfounded because the city and I believe the state health department came by and checked our noise levels with all of our equipment running and found us to be in compliance. So the nuisance complaint that was filed against us was simply unfounded at that time.
There's been no state or EPA air quality issues that
No.
you guys have been?
No.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Where, in the map, where exactly is the new machine intended to be located?
It's gonna be right along the tracks on the west side.
On that east side where it's curved, it's gonna be within about 50 feet of that curved line on the east side, about halfway up.
Well, the west.
Well, on the west side of the
Yeah.
curved line, yeah.
Yeah.
West of the track.
Yeah,
Yeah.
west of the track.
It'll be close enough that the conveyor that brings the sorted non-ferrous out will stockpile it right next to the track. And if it works out for us, we can swing the conveyor over rail cars and load it directly into rail cars.
And the distance from the proposed site and the residence is about 300 yards?
I believe about 300
300
feet.
yeah.
About 100 yards, probably.
Right.
Would this increase the use of that railroad spur at all,
Yes.
potentially? Okay.
Yeah. We have, in the past 8 years, we've averaged producing about 22,000 tons a year. We've had some years that were less. We've had one year that we went over 30,000 tons, which is about 300 rail cars being shipped out. The capacity of this machine and our air quality permit requests would allow 120,000 tons a year to be processed. But feasibly, economically, and with what we're planning, if we could reach 40 to 50,000 tons, which would be another, our peak year would be another 100 to 150 rail cars. But it would be well within the realm of financial success if we could reach 40 to 50,000 tons a year.
And that's only your ferrous metal that you're putting in those rail cars currently, or is that
We
waste as
only
well?
Normally, we ship just ferrous. Sometimes, right now, we're shipping what we call aluminum breakage to other shredders. And this is aluminum with iron on it. And when you run it through a shredder, of course, the magnets and reverse eddy currents separate this stuff. So we occasionally ship a carload of aluminum breakage to another shredder, which we wouldn't do if we had our own shredder. But normally, there's nothing goes out in the rail cars but ferrous material. We ship non-ferrous by truck.
Mr. Robertson, you just mentioned your air quality permit.
Yes.
Who issued that? And is
Well,
it,
it hasn't been completed yet,
Okay.
but we have,
Do you have a copy of it?
I don't, I thought I
It'll be
had
the
one.
Department of Environmental Quality, North Dakota's.
you have your permit pending with them,
Yeah.
We
correct?
have it pending. I think we actually submitted the request for it in March of this year,
Okay.
March of '23. yeah.
March of '23, I mean.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, if this helps, I went up and grabbed my copy of the code. So what the Robertsons are currently conducting right now is considered, the use type is salvage services, where they're engaged in storage sales, dismantling or other processing of used and waste materials not intended for reuse. And it actually mentions automobile wrecking, wrecking yards, which is what they're doing. Adding the new machine in which could result in noticeable noise, odor, vibration, or air pollution effects across property lines. That was in staff's opinion. Adding that new machine is what necessitated the need for a special use permit. So the operation is still there as a salvage yard, but by putting this new machine in, it's anticipated that this new machine would create impacts across other properties that aren't currently being created by the current operation. And this is in 3903009 under industrial use types. If that helps.
Yes, thank you,
And the
Mr. Chairman.
salvage yard is permitted. That's a permitted use in general industrial. But heavy industry does require special use permit.
But we would have to have some kind of fact that this new machine would increase the noise levels. I mean,
Noise, vibration, and so on.
that's where the technical specs would have been nice to
Yeah.
see on what this thing,
This,
It
May I-
sounds like what's happening is we're basically going from a mechanical operation to a more automated type operation, correct? I mean, basically, that's our difference here, right?
In a way,
I mean,
yeah.
We're still doing the same process, it just done differently, right?
More efficiently, and
we currently operate a shredder now,
Yep.
but it's a small shredder, about half the size of this podium, and it has a 50-horse electric motor on it. But if you stand right next to that shredder, it's producing about 120 dB noise level. You know, so the major difference in the shredder that we're requesting the permit to put in is basically the size of the machine. But the process is not gonna change. I mean, we're currently using those same processes in the equipment that we have.
Mr. Robertson and staff, this is Lydia Crabtree with IEC. I've done some noise calculations based on distance as well as the noise dampening equipment barrier that's going to be put in at 40 foot tall. So we can project that the minimum noise dampening will be 40 decibels. If the equipment is operating at 120 decibels at the property boundary, it should be 80 decibels, and that is not taking into account the 20-foot steel fence that's going to be put up that will also have noise dampening suppression insulation with that fence. So at the property boundary, based on calculations that we have, there should not be more than 80 decibels. It should be less than 80 and probably less than 75.
Is that 40 decibel reduction based on the noise suppression or based on the distance?
It's based on both.
Okay, okay.
Well, that would put us right at,
So if you don't have any more questions for the applicant, I can summarize discussion real quickly.
any other questions for the applicant?
There's one other thing I would like to request.
Sure.
Is in the city's staff's paperwork, they're mentioning that they approve this based on an annual review where they possibly reject the permit on an annual basis. And that's gonna be very difficult. We've invested $2.5 million so far, and by the time we finish this project, we'll have over $10 million in it by the time we get the shredder in place and the downstream operating. And you simply can't finance equipment like that with a 1-year limitation on operation. So I guess what I would ask that you look at the air quality standards, the noise codes, and base it on that if we're actually in violation or something, and not have a list of nuisance complaints being a reason to reject this. Because we're gonna do everything in our power to comply with all of the state and local standards on this. And we'd hate to have a list of sometimes unfounded complaints be a reason for shutting us down.
I mean, the complaints would have to be investigated and proven, obviously. I mean,
Well,
we wouldn't just shut you down because somebody said that you're too noisy over there. I mean,
And-
I would hope that would be the way we would take that. I mean, they'd have to be found in complaints, I mean.
okay,
Point of clarification, we would not be renewing the special use permit on an annual basis. It would more or less just be a report, an annual review. These are the complaints. They're found in compliance based on the conditions in the special use permit itself. But it wouldn't be something that you would need to worry about that's going to be revoked on a yearly basis.
And it would come in front of us before, I mean, we would have to make a recommendation here to the city commission to revoke your special use permit, which you would have your chance to plead your case here, plus at the city commission, so.
okay.
I still think it's a gray area, in my opinion, that we're even here today. But I don't know what the rest of you think.
Mr. Chairman, I have one more question. regarding kind of standard operating procedure, would there be air quality tests, vibration tests, and noise tests after the fact to make sure we're in compliance? Would that be a normal operating procedure?
I'll let the applicant speak as to their plans for operations, but.
I mean, on
provide
our part
additional-
for compliance.
Well, those would be things that we'd definitely like to see. The challenge, and that was pointed out by Mr. Robertson, was, for example, on the vibration side, if there is vibration monitoring and we can at least see the data, there's some reasonable probability that, say, just the rail cars passing by will ultimately cause a spike, and that's not associated with their specific operation. So that was discussed internally as far as additional countermeasures or monitoring, so.
I am assuming this shredder will be able to provide that data, correct? When you're at your highest peak for decibels or what you're putting out. With going into an automated system, it's, I mean, I'm under the impression that they would be providing reports in regards to what your machine is putting out. Is that correct? Like, does the machine measure its own sound?
No.
It doesn't.
No. We would have to put something external around it to test that. They've provided us a little bit of data, I guess, that as far as noise and stuff that they've tested on other machines, I believe with like a handheld or portable noise testing device.
And I believe staff has been out before and measured you guys' decibels from past complaints, if building and codes has, but.
And just to I know that y'all are probably familiar with the maximum permitted sound levels at residential boundaries. It's at residential boundaries. And I'm not sure what the closest residential boundary is, but for general industrial, between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 p.m., it's 75 decibels. It's for a maximum of 1 hour. And between 11 p.m. and 7 p.m., it's 65 decibels. So it's not just a matter of being right at the boundary of the property. It's actually being at the boundary of the property line of wherever that residential boundary is.
How would that apply to the residents that's in the industrial zone, though? Would it apply to that boundary?
Yeah, I mean,
That's a good question.
I mean, they're zoned industrial.
They are zoned general industrial.
This is where the history of the subject property would be.
All right, well, anyway, I just wanted to add that to the record.
So it seems that the applicant would like to have a shorter period for the final approval overall. We did receive basically a deluge of information this week and last week, both from the public comment, which we then had to go and try to verify some of these claims. And we also very recently, I think 2 days ago, received from IEC on the call here some more information about measures that they're advising them to take. So, you know, it kind of depends. If you want to have more information before you make a decision, we may need some additional time to review it and verify these things. But otherwise, it seems that if you like to take it at face value, that, you know, overall it is satisfying the basic requirements in the city ordinance. But the special use permit process really is intended for you to decide whether this is something that we would like to have in the city and what is fair for the other residents. And since they submitted the public comment, then that is just something to kind of consider here. But in terms of objectivity, that's kind of the reason why staff can't really provide a recommendation to specifically approve or deny here, because there's not really a way on such short notice to kind of conclude whether this is going to be a net positive or negative. So if you would instead base it on what would be fair to the applicant and the nearby public, then that would be your determination to make here.
Mr. Robertson?
I would like to mention something on the economic benefit that's not in any of the papers that I submitted. The amount of material that we've bought for scrap salvage is over 173,000 tons, and we've paid out to the local community in the last 8 years right at $30 million for this material. So there is impact to the local community financially for this. And while we would hope to pull in some material from perhaps as far away as Sturgis, South Dakota, or Williston or Minot, we would, by having this shredder, I would think that we would even draw more material out of the countryside for this thing. So that would definitely be an increase in payout to the local communities.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Mr. Romo, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you would allow me to make a few comments.
Sure.
I'm Dean Rummel. I'm just a citizen of Dickinson, North Dakota here. I'm a customer and a neighbor of Robertson's. And how I got into that position is I'm co-administrator for my father's estate. As you might know, Rummel's Lauterecking was on Main Street for 60 years. And how I became a customer of Robertson's is they were the company that came in, took 52 loads out of my downtown location. And the other location that I have is directly to the west of them. I have 10 acres. My father purchased 10 acres from Porter Brothers. And so if you'd like some history, I actually have that history because it was my dad that brought it in front of the Zoning Commission to change all of that to G1. So what happened in the late 80s is Porter Brothers was actually on that site before Continental Metals, the Robertson site. My father had an arrangement with Porter Brothers that they were crushing all of our vehicles on the 10 acres that he eventually bought in the 1990s. But this was in the late 80s that he brought this forward. They annexed that whole section G1 to the city of Dickinson at that time. He made that presentation, and I know that there was some opposition at the time, but they went ahead and approved it. So it all became G1 at that point in time. We had 1,000 vehicles also on that 10 acres that I was talking about. They also came in and took care of those 1,000 vehicles for me. They processed them and shipped them out by rail. And so when you look at the economic benefit of what we're dealing with here, this is tremendous, mainly because this is a primary sector business. And if we look at the state of North Dakota and the North Dakota Department of Commerce, they've already labeled them as a primary sector business. This is the best of all. I was involved in a primary sector business called TMI for years. They love it when we have outside money being brought into the state of North Dakota. This is exactly what they're doing. Probably some of the vehicles that you're driving are from some of the cars that we crushed here 3 years ago and shredded and shipped out, because 90% of iron is recycled in this country. It's a great economic benefit, though, to Southwest North Dakota. If you look at all the oil tanks and all the windmills and everything that we need to recycle, we need a place like this. I needed a place like this to clean what I had to clean up. They took 3 million pounds off of my west location, those 10 acres, and shipped it out for us. Talk about having it easy on our roads. If we had to do all of that by truck, if you had to truck it all out, the other thing that I would see is that my father he collected a lot of things, and he kept everything, which is another story. But we would have this stuff sitting around in people's yards and in the countryside if we didn't have a place like this. And we're losing all of our recyclers. Rummel's Lauterecking is gone. We have East End Auto yet. They're still collecting vehicles, and they have a tremendous number of them out there if you ever drive out there. They're right across the street from us on 25th. And so I really want to support this special use permit because we need these people. We need them to take all of our washers and dryers and everything that I see going through that facility. I've been out there a lot, The economics of this has a major impact on this area, and I want to make sure you understand that. I sold over $250,000 worth of iron to them in that 1 year. And that was all coming out of the city of Dickinson. It also returned some property for you to the taxable base, with another coffee shop, of course, on West Villard. But that's beside the point. So, you know, recycling and having to be carbon neutral, this is exactly what we need. And it's, you know, somebody willing to make a $10 million investment, they're going to have a lot of sales and use tax. They have a lot of property taxes that they pay for already. This is, again, an extremely good benefit to the city of Dickinson and Southwest North Dakota. So I encourage you to approve this special use permit.
Thank you, Mr. Romo. Okay. Is there any other questions for the applicants or staff? If not, we will open this public hearing on this special use permit. This time we will open the public hearing. If there's anybody in the audience or online at 701-456-7006 that has any comments or concerns regarding the special use permit, please step forward or state your name online.
Yes, I have a comment.
Can I have your name, please?
Lori Sticka.
Good morning, Ms. Sticka. What kind of comments would you like to make this morning?
Well, we're the resident that lives right next door to Robertson's. And, you know, we have nothing against Robertson's themselves. They're good people, and I agree that this is something that needs, what they do is good. But if any of you would come and live in our house, I don't think any of you would want to come and live in our house. I mean, we have come to an understanding with Reggie and the boys as far as, you know, work hours and whatever. And as it is right now, we're good. My concern is the noise and the auto fluff that may come from this and the further devaluation of our property. And in talking to Jim Samurai with the North Dakota EPA, he has not received a permit to his knowledge for the EPA of this. And I'm just, you know, I want, if you are going to approve it, I want some assurances that our foundation is not going to, you know, move or shake or bust or our walls crack. Because, I mean, there are days when they have to bust up big oil tanks, which I understand, when they have to bang it, that our walls do shake and we do have some cracks. But that's occasionally. It's now and then. It's not an everyday thing, which I'm afraid this would be an everyday thing. And as far as, like back in the 1980s when we were next, right next to us was a pasture with cows in. And as Mr. Rummel just stated, yes, you know, Rummel's has always been back there, but they didn't do the stuff that Robertson's do. They brought in vehicles, scrap metal, and they shipped it out. They didn't process it. There's a difference. And Continental Metal also did not do any processing. They brought stuff in, they shipped it out. So there is a difference. And, you know, this is nothing to do with Robertson's, nothing to do with you guys. This was something that should have been addressed by the city back in the 1980s. And as far as us protesting, we did protest at that time. And Art Baumgartner reassured us that there would be no businesses other than, you know, like the other businesses that are out here, like Brentag and such. Because at that time, the city wanted to annex the land so they could build, they annexed this whole acreage out here. And it was only annexed because they talked the Schnagel brothers into it. Because they owned the majority of the land that was annexed at the time in 1980. And after they talked them into it, the Schnagel brothers really didn't know what they had signed up for. So this is a concern. And I mean, you know, we've been here since, you know, forever. 1975 or 6 is when we bought our property out here. And like I say, at that time, we had cows living next door to us. And Ivan Meyer owned this land out here. So those are just my comments. I would hope that, you know, if it does go through and you put the special permit, I would hope that it be regulated as far as noise, vibration, and smell. Because we also like to go outside and enjoy our backyard, open our windows, and some days that's just not possible. And like I say, it's nothing against Robertson's, because they were put in this position by the city. So I go back to blaming the city for these problems. Not Robertson's, but the city. And that's my comment.
Thank you, Ms. Sticka.
Thank you.
Mr. Robertson?
Again, I'm Reginald Robertson. Lori Sticka is mistaken about Continental not processing metals. I've dealt with Continental. I did demolition on Minuteman missile silos for a number of years out of Rapid City and Grand Forks. And I used to ship before we took over this yard, I used to ship everything that were produced into Continental Metals, either right into the yard in Dickinson or Minot, or in some places we would broker it through those guys and go right to Regina, Canada. But Continental has always processed in this yard. They always had shears. They had a car crusher. They had torches. They did everything that we've done, except just on a little bit smaller scale. When I was doing demolition on Minuteman missile silos, we were producing about 1,000 tons a month. And Sue Meyer, who was the controller for Continental Metals, said that I was actually producing more than either the Dickinson or the Minot yard. So, but it was the same stuff. It was just a different level of production. But they've always produced, processed and produced in the yard here in Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Mr. Rommel?
This is Lydia Crabtree. Just to the specific point that North Dakota DEQ, the representative that Ms. Stickett spoke to said they did not receive the air permit. IEC does have a stamped receipt verification provided by North Dakota DEQ on March of 2023 that they did receive the proposed air permit.
Thank you. Mr. Rommel?
Dean Rummel again. I just want to explain a little bit further on that property. I spent a lot of time out at my father's place, and if you're familiar with that property, Fisher Industries has which is a wonderful thing for the city of Dickinson also. They allow broken up concrete and asphalt to be dumped into an area where they regrind it and crush it up. And that is between Robertson and I, where our 10 acres, is where Fisher Industries has that particular pile. And if you go out there right now, there's a huge pile there. And they come in and they crush that. And they make a fair amount of noise and a lot of dust. And I don't mean to pick on them, but that happens a couple of times a year in which there's a whole bunch of traffic and there's a whole bunch of grinding going on. And if the wind's blowing in the wrong direction, you know, we used to get quite a bit of it in our yard. And I'm not complaining or anything about it, but besides that, there's Mindak right there, and if you know during the fall when they start grinding, they grind all night long. I've been out there at 9, 10 o'clock at night, and the dB noise in our 10 acres is fairly high. But this is an industrial area. It's G1. They kind of have all of this going on already. And then lastly, I lived 37 years on the eastern side of Dickinson. There are certain times of the years in my first 37 years of life in which the lagoons had quite an odor. And I was thankful when the city made that change and we no longer had that, but there was many times that I couldn't open the windows at our house. I mean, the spring of the year. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, if you know what happens on the east side of town on Tuesdays and Thursdays, there was another smell that came into our area, and that was, of course, livestock sales. We had that quite a bit into that area, and you know, that has been reduced. But the quality of life, I have to tell you, was certainly affected by those. And I understand what Mrs. Sticka is saying. There certainly is things that were happening out there on the east side of town. But I just wanted to point those out that, some of them are remedied. I understand the city is going to start using those lagoons again. I know we're at capacity. So I'm sure there will be some additional issues that we'll be dealing with there.
It's only gonna be reused water, though.
Great.
It's not gonna be sewage, it'll be treated reused water, so,
That's
just
good.
for storage.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem.
So I'll just make a few final, more dispositive points here. So if you were to approve a special use permit for this use, probably this is one of the best locations possible for their sake. I mean, this is where the rail spur is, but also in terms of prevailing winds, being in this location is going to be more favorable compared to over at the west.
They run and grab some drawings if they'd like to see them.
Oh, would you like to?
Public hearing still is
Yeah,
open,
I'm
yes.
not sure how many copies they've got.
Let's see, I can pass
We'll
this
continue.
on.
Is there anyone else in the public that has any comments or concerns regarding this special use permit application? Anyone in the public? Okay, at this time, we will close the public hearing since there's no other comments. And I think we got a little bit of a staff summation. I guess. Yes. My only other questions is, it sounds like they've been working on this a long time. So how did we get involved?
Well, then,
I mean, in the 11th hour, it sounds like, so.
well, came to our attention in October. Something to keep in mind is that we are in a bit of a period of transition. So, the way we approach these things are naturally going to change. And also there's going to be whether communications and documentation can, cleanly move over. It's an operation that we are working on. So seeking constant improvements. After I was notified of this in October, gave it a couple weeks and met with the development team staff. We also then invited them in for a pre-application meeting, sent some feedback. Then this was scheduled. I think this was submitted the last week of December or early January for this meeting. So at that point, we kind of lacked some information still. We had a general idea of what they were proposing and some assurances that it was going to be generally anodyne. But then in the last couple weeks, again, we received significantly more information. And then based on the public comment, wanted to look into this question about air quality. And so on that note, when we compare this to other locations in the area, other emitters or emitters of poor air quality or vibration or noise, one way to look at it, of course, would be that they're not as noisome as the neighbors. Another way to look at it would be that it is an accumulative effect. So if the rail's there, and then there's also added vibrations, then it's not going to necessarily be a neutral thing. It's not that because the rail would cause more vibrations and noise that this wouldn't add to it. So that's something to consider here. But again, we're kind of working on the information that we have, and this is basically where we got. So we have this environmental engineering firm, which has also on the 16th of January provided some additional information, clarity, and methods that they would be applying. So I would say that if you were to approve the special use permit, then we would simply ask that you apply conditions that we can go in and see that these proposals are actually being tried, tested, that they're working. And if they're not working, we would probably ask Robertson's to, work with us to figure something else out rather than, suggesting to revoke it.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question regarding the permit. There's a lot of discussion about the permit being submitted, but has the permit been approved? And if not, what's the timeline in which you expect to have that permit approved?
Which permit are you referring
The
to?
permit from the state. The DEQ, I believe, is Department of Environmental Quality. What's the status of the permit actually being approved?
That'd be a correct
We
question. For
sub-
oh, go ahead.
My name is Claiborne Thornton. I'm with Industrial Environmental Consultants. And I came over and met with Mr. Thornton in North Dakota in Bismarck and submitted the application to him, reviewed with him what needed to be in that application. At the time, he was quite busy with other air applications for the fracking operations, and he has said that they were completely understaffed. But he has responded to us here in the last month or so that they had gotten to the point that they were ready to move ahead with the permit, and that they're going to be asked for us to have a public comment period on the permit, which is a little bit different from where he started out. At first he thought he wouldn't need to do that, but he decided he would. So he has been evidently the single guy processing air permits and been quite overworked. So he is it's taken him longer than he anticipated to complete our permit.
Follow-up question to that.
Do have a follow-up question to that. So as part of that permitting process with the department, do you or does the applicant need the approval of the city in order to be able to get the permit from the state, or are those completely not connected? My question to that then, again, to the board is, do you grant a special use permit to this particular operation when they don't have the permit from the state at this point? And so that's why I'm trying to understand the timeline of when that permit is expected to be, hopefully, for the applicant approved.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can make,
Well, it's my understanding.
go ahead. Sorry, Mr. Thornton.
It's my understanding that the federal government has issued authority to the state of North Dakota to review and approve the air permit, which is required for constructing for operating and constructing the shredder there. The matters of the appropriate zoning and the use permit that we require, special use permit that we're being required to now, even though that was evidently not in place when we first came to the city back in 22, when Mr. Robertson did. But the city may have a separate set of requirements in addition to the state's air permit requirement.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess for the comments for the board and looking at the staff recommendation, it's something that you obviously may want to include, is that condition or that approval would be conditioned upon the state permit being approved. I don't necessarily see that it's in the staff recommendation, but it's certainly something to make sure that they're not only in compliance with state and local laws, but also federal. So that would be something I think that should be explored as part of your recommendation.
Thank you, Ms.
And I
Winter.
would concur with Ms. Wanko, is typically in a special use permit that there is a condition that says that it'll operate in accordance with all city, state, whatever. That's just standard language, and if you do decide to adopt that, the staff can provide that to you. The other recommendation I would make too is that should you approve it, that you say that this is approved based upon the information that, in the application that was submitted by the Robertsons.
Okay. Any other comments from staff or commissioners? Any questions for staff or?
Is there
anyone
another,
online?
sorry, I was gonna say, is there another one of these facilities in the state, or where's the closest?
During the pre-application meeting, they shared that this is the only one,
Okay.
and that they would be collecting materials from South Dakota and Montana. Possibly more.
Yeah, you can ask questions of anybody.
Okay. So the special use permit basically was triggered by the definition of heavy industrial now, correct? Did I
That's
say that
correct.
right? Okay. And the special use permit time frame is into perpetuity, assuming no issues or complaints?
Some of them may have different, I mean, if you're gonna talk about the definition of special use permit in general, it seems that a few of them may have annual actual renewal,
Okay.
but in a baseline kind of sense, that's not the case.
Okay, so this one does not, okay?
Yeah, Mr. Bush, just to, I'm sorry to keep coming up here, but certain permits, like we typically do this with daycares, it runs with the owner. In this case, I think the condition in there actually said it would run with the land. So
Okay.
say at some point, the Robertsons decided to sell this off, who the next property, and the next property owners wanted to operate the same thing, they would not have to come back in front of, if they weren't going to change the operation or the location of it, they would not have to come back in front of planning and zoning commission, commission for this.
Okay.
One other limitation that there is that they have 2 years from the time that the city commission approves the special use permit for it to be developed. So if something, say the city commission approves this and something happens and this, this new crusher isn't built, then the special use permit expires and they would have to come back
Okay.
for that. But it sounds like they're on track.
Okay, and I think Mr. Bollinger had asked a question too with the special use permit. Currently, staff didn't have any recommendations as far as an annual noise, vibration, or dust, odor testing to see that they are complying annually.
Probably if they're in compliance with the state for air quality, that would probably suffice. We've explored also internally some options to share with the applicant, but it would be more in satisfaction of the conditions as they're already stated, basically to address nuisance complaints and investigate them and see if there's something that's borne out there. So in that regard, we would work with them going forward to see what might work. Would a decibel reader on site work? Where would it need to be located? How well will the Acoustifence and Acoustiblock sound suppression system that they plan to install, how well will that work? But at this moment, there's not really a way to kind of put that into conditions. It's more of a let's take a look at how this works, and if it's not working, we'll probably come back to you next year.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? All right, hearing nothing else, no other questions? Commissioners, what are your wishes on this special use permit? I think Ms. Wanko would recommend it if we do make a motion to approve, that we make it contingent on approval of the state air quality permit from DEQ.
And any of those other things that were mentioned, like what Attorney Wanko mentioned and what I mentioned, you would have, if you approve it, that would have to be part of the motion to specifically mention those conditions.
I'd still like to see if we could get clarification whether that permit needs to be the EPA or whatever permit needs to be approved before or after this meeting? I mean, that'd be nice to know.
They can't begin operation.
Yeah, I'm assuming the state air quality permit would not allow them to operate until it's approved, but.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with their process, but I would guess that that is accurate.
Sorry,
That would be
Yeah.
required.
I meant if we have to approve this in order for that permit to, in order to allow that permit to go through, I guess.
Perhaps the consultant can give a better answer than I can on that, to see whether they could answer that question more directly.
Well, also, I believe that would probably depend on final approval at city commission, being the city's approval, correct?
Well, and that DEQ permit was applied for
That's-
before
Correct,
this application, so,
correct.
so I would guess that.
And to my knowledge, there's been no outreach or request from the DEQ to consider or provide any additional feedback on the topic, so.
This is Claiborne Thornton again with Industrial Environmental Consultants. It's been my observation over the years that the air permit issued by the state is a separate item from the approval by the city or county for the requirements of that body. Typically, the city and county both approve of the process in advance of the air permit being approved, because the owner wants to ensure that everything is going to be acceptable in the local community before he reaches out to the state to secure that air permit. In other words, you want to make sure that he would be able to construct, would be within the proper boundaries of the local requirements before the air permit is secured. And I think that was part of the, what I understand Mr. Robertson saying, that he had asked the city if there was going to be any requirements, and when he found that there was not going to be, then that was the go-ahead to apply for the air permit. So we're in a little bit unusual situation, but I think the normal process would be that if we could secure the approval of the city first, that would be very helpful in ensuring that we can move ahead with the whole process.
Commissioners, Steve Josephson again. I can't speak for the city, but I know on the county end, we've had a number of projects where as part of the permitting process, these administrative permits would have to be submitted, and, and that the final, either submitting, that final approval would be contingent, permit approval would be contingent upon showing that these permits were issued by, in this case, by EPA.
Practically speaking, I think that if this were to come in front of the state and it was only conditioned upon the state's approval, that the likelihood of the state granting that, absent some of their concerns, would probably be pretty high from a practical perspective.
Right, because they're not I mean, what y'all are here today, you're here to consider, you're here to consider the location and what's in the, what's in the zoning ordinance. And I think that Attorney Wanko's proposed condition that they have to follow all city, state, federal regulations, I think it adequately, Commissioner Schwab, I think that adequately addresses your concerns.
Anything else?
I think, I have one question, Mr. Gallagher, on the, subject to the following conditions. Number 2, the last sentence there, will be recorded as part of the annual review of the special use permit. Staff will report any significant findings of nuisance to the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider revocation of the special use permit. I'm wondering if we would reword that to ascertain what remedies need to be enacted to continue the special use permit.
We can make that adjustment, I believe.
Making it more as a cooperative effort to make sure that they can continue to operate again, while abiding by what we, by what's in code, I guess, if you will.
Sure,
that
we'll
make
just
sense?
need to get a legal opinion, and can probably adjust that.
As it reads now, it sounds like if there's problems down the road, that what we're looking at is pulling it from them. And I don't know if that would be necessarily
I
the
mean,
case.
let me understand the process. Ms. Winkle they would report to us their findings of any complaints, and if they were in violation, they would report that to us. It would be up to us to decide to recommend to the city commission to revoke their permit or not.
Correct. I mean, obviously, if it was a situation where, there might be other remedies available to the city through the municipal code with talks about nuisances and abatements. But yes, in a nutshell, that would be the process. It would come back in front of you. We would examine exactly what's going on, what the city has done to investigate the issue, and what potential remedies could be worked out. If you gave them an opportunity to get into compliance and it still was not happening, we'd bring it back, and then eventually you'd recommend it up to the city commission to determine whether the permit would need to be revoked at that point. But I think what we could do is to ease some of the concerns with regard to the language, is simply say staff will report any significant findings of nuisance to the Planning and Zoning Commission for investigation to determine, whether additional remedies are available or required to continue the special use permit, something along those lines, so it's not an automatic assumption that it's a revocation. But anytime when we have a situation like this, we always look to investigate those issues, whether that's done through Mr. Galbert's department or, building and codes. We obviously want to give deference to the applicant, but also adhere to the complaints that are coming in by the citizens and the residents.
Yeah, and again, I'm going back to the code. So for your concerns, was that Commissioner Bush who asked that question? It actually says in 3912, the city commission may revoke a special use permit should the operation of the use subject to such permit violate the conditions under which the permit is granted. But, typically, when you find somebody is in violation, you try to work with them, and get them back on track. So in the end, it is up to the city commission to make that final decision as to whether or not they want to revoke a special use permit.
Okay. Thank you,
Hope
Mr.
that helps.
Yep.
And, to be slightly pedantic, I guess that's what I'm here for. In a technical sense, it wouldn't need to go to Planning and Zoning Commission, I believe. It could be considered at City Commission to revoke it, but it's probably best practice to bring it here first. But I just want to clarify that point as well.
Okay, and then my only other comment was number one does require an annual compliance review, the condition that you guys set forth, I guess. So, okay. Thank you.
Okay. I think we've got that worked out. Is there anyone that would like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I can take a stab at it. Move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of SUP-001-2024 Robertson Metal Recycling LLC Special Use Permit, subject to the conditions above as amended by Mr. Bush's comments and Ms. Wanko's verbiage, in addition to the contingency that we would require all applicable North Dakota air quality permits to be in place prior to operations, as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. How was that? Okay?
I would ask Mr. Bollinger whether he wished to have a condition saying that it would be approved according to the application.
And according to all the information submitted in the
To
application.
the application that was the application.
Yep, I would amend that.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
A second by Mr. Franchuk. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And motion carries. All right, we'll move on to the next item this morning. This is a future land use map amendment, FLM-001-2024, to to consider a future land use map amendment from residential to commercial for a property legally described as a parcel of land being a portion of lots 4, 5, and 6 of Block 1 State 8th Edition. Mr. Gallagher.
So all of the following applications are going to be related to lots 4, 5, and 6 of Block 1, State 8th Edition. For the future land use map, this is a great example of why the staff needs to review the comprehensive plan every 3 to 5 years, because the northern 60% or so would be intended to remain community commercial along Fairway Street, which is intended to be an minor arterial in the future. The southern 40% or so would be high-density residential. And for the public, this high-density residential zoning classification does not mean anything like apartment towers or necessarily even mid-rise apartments. In some cases, that could occur, but on the amount of land that's provided here and with the adjoined major plat application, probably the most units that you could get in there would be 11 or 12. And so the applicant is proposing to have this future land use map amended to residential so that the rezoning application for R3 can be approved as well. They intend to plat, I believe, 5 lots on the south side to front 8th Street West. And so the problem with the future land use map now is that these lots, and with the plat currently, is that these lots front both streets. And that is an effective waste of street frontage and utilities. So the south side is fronting a local road in a residential neighborhood, so it's perfectly matching the character of the development pattern. And in the comprehensive plan, it's more of the overview, kind of directional idea of what we should do in the city. And so it was correct, but we do need to sometimes fine tune it in this regard. So this application gets a pretty full-throated recommendation for approval from staff. And no public comments have been submitted for this application specifically, but in response to the rezone, someone had left a message that they feel a bit worried about apartment complexes, which is why I mentioned that. I asked the applicant about this, and they suggested that it would be probably 5 to 10 units, single family detached and or townhomes or duplexes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Ms. Winkle, for myself, I'd like to probably sit out on this one. I'm currently, my day job is working with the applicant to buy one of these lots for future development by my company, so I think it'd be best if Mr. Bullinger probably takes it from here, so.
Always better to err on the side of caution, so we'll have the record reflect that Chairman Frederick is going to abstain from discussion and vote.
Okay, can you take over?
Yeah.
Okay, with that, any more comments, Mr. Cole?
No, that's it. I'll stand for any questions.
Okay, if not, we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Andrew Schrank with Highlands Engineering, representing the applicant Venture Commercial. Mr. Grinsteiner, one of the owners of Venture Commercial, is here today as well to address any questions I may not be able to. But to summarize, what we're proposing here is a change from commercial to residential on the south, roughly 110 feet of these 3 currently commercial lots that are undeveloped. The intention here is to create some smaller commercial lots. Through the market research and the development these guys have done, they have found that larger commercial lots aren't as highly desirable as some smaller lots to better meet the demands of the area. So the 3 commercial lots would get reduced from about 1 acre to about 0.6 acres each. And then the southern portion of that would create some additional residential opportunities. There's a high demand for residential property in the States Edition area. It's sought as one of the better residential developments in Dickinson, I guess, for lack of a better term. So they're going to create some additional residential opportunities with this as well and kind of meet 2 demands in the market in this area. This will help promote some infill development. This area is undeveloped, but there's currently streets and infrastructure around this, so this change will help this area to develop and create some infill for the city. To address some of the concerns with apartments, that is not the intent here. I guess kind of jumping the gun to the next item here, but the R3 zoning that they're proposing is really to reduce the setback requirement. The city code has a buffer yard provision between residential and commercial property. So to reduce that buffer yard provision, that's really the intent of the R3 zoning. It also provides, I think, a better transition from the commercial into the residential, the R2 zoning that's to the south. So instead of just jumping from commercial right to R2, it provides a transition in density from commercial to R3 to R2. So those are the main reasons for the R2. As we get to the subdivision plat, you'll see the lot sizes are around 10 to 12,000 square feet. So really not going to be conducive to an apartment complex. The highest density that they currently plan would be duplexes within the property. So it'll be a mix likely of 2-unit and single-unit residences on that southern edge. With that, I guess I would stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Schrank. Any questions for the applicant? Hearing none.
Thank you.
We will open up public comment. Anyone in the public have any comments or questions? Anyone attending virtually? Hearing none. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Any other input from staff?
I would just basically support more of what Mr. Schrank has shared. It's probably a very positive development. The only concern would be related to the major plat and whether this very long block, it's 2,200 feet long, whether that's acceptable. But all of this had already been approved before, so that's relevant to their overall project regarding the 3 applications here.
Okay.
But it is certainly correct that infill development is highly desirable, and R2 or R3 infill especially so. This is in a residential neighborhood very close to Rocky View Park, and it can really only serve to generate more demand for the community commercial properties. Currently working with the applicant to try to devise some way for site plans to work out in favor of the community a bit more and try to figure out how we can adjust parking requirements and where they're situated on the property and such without necessarily constraining the opportunities for the developer, because we need to basically adjust the zoning code moving forward. And so other than that, it's really just, other than just the long block here, there's not really any detractions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of FLM-001-2024 as being compliant with the City of Dickinson Comprehensive Plan and also being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
Okay. We have a
I'll
motion.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried, and you can note that Mr. Frederick abstained. Item E is to consider a zoning map amendment from community commercial to high-density residential for a property legally described as parcel of land being a portion of lots 4, 5, and 6, Block 1, State 8th Edition. Mr. Galbert.
So I would really just repeat all of the same points, and I'm sure Mr. Schrank might as well, so we can probably skip to the applicants. Okay. In that case, I would recommend approval, and this is the specific application that did get the public comment, and that has been submitted to the attachments, I believe, already. Okay. And so staff recommends approval of this application as well.
Okay. Any questions for staff or the applicant for that matter? Okay, we'll open up for public comment. Any additional public comments, either here or online? Any additional comments? Hearing none, we'll close the public comment portion. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve or deny.
I'll make a motion. I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of REZ 001-2024 as being compliant with the City of Dickinson Comprehensive Plan, as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code, and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Schwab. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried, and again, please note Mr. Frederick abstained. Item F is to consider a preliminary plat for State 9th Edition, being the replat of lots 4, 5, and 6, Block 1 of State 8th Edition, located in Section 5, Township 139 North, Range 96 West of the 5th Principal Meridian, Stark County, located within the City of Dickinson. Site consists of approximately 3.09 acres. Mr. Caliber.
Thank you, Commissioner Billinger. This, once again, corresponds to the other two applications preceding it. In this case, again, all the same comments. However, the applicant has been working with the city engineering department, so Josh may wish to speak more to explain their intentions with the ingress and egress, as well as possible alterations to the median as they work with the DOT as well.
Go ahead.
So specifically to gain access, and although not understanding exactly what the intent was at the time when this was originally platted, it's reasonable to presume that the intended access was off of 8th Street. Now with splitting these, access off of Fairway would be required. So, so in this case, then there's a median currently in place. We'd have to work with the developer to remove part of that median. Because of the street classification, and that's currently a collector, but in our transportation master plan that was approved back in 2013, and then ultimately some of the documentation that we've submitted further to the east, 9th Street is a minor arterial. So we actually submitted documentation to the DOT already to reclass this to a minor arterial. Regardless whether it's a minor arterial or collector, those are just circumstances, but ultimately, so information has been shared with the North Dakota Department of Transportation, both with the district office here in Dickinson, but also with the local government staff, providing our recommendations for 2 individual approaches to the north, and then working with the developer on ultimately gaining access, being there's 3 lots, so then it would split the lot lines, and you'd have access to all 3 of those specific lots. In particular, though, we're looking at not only the proximity to that intersection, but also, well, I guess both intersections, but in particular to 23rd Street, but then the proximity of the 2 approaches to each other and not creating traffic concerns for the ingress and egress to these properties.
So if the northern lots, commercial lots were developed, we'd be required to make 3 entrance points from westbound lane?
The request was for 3 approaches, and we recommended, based on the transportation master plan and the spacing requirements for the approaches, to go down to 2.
Okay.
Yeah, with the applicant agreed.
Okay. Any other questions for staff?
There's already one of those approaches basically in place. You would just create a turning lane, from what I understand, for the hospital there.
So the approach to the north, where it goes into the hospital, we would align directly south of that. So there'd be alignment with that approach, and then an additional approach to the east, splitting the lot line. I don't have the plat right in front of me, so I'm sorry, I can't specify which lots. I apologize. Yeah, there'd be an additional, between lots 2 and 3, there'd be an additional approach in between those 2. And those were the 2 approaches. There was originally a request further to the east, a 3rd approach, splitting lot 3 as well as with the adjacent property to the east. Again, we requested the applicant not include that, partially because we don't know what the future development plans are for that lot, but also the proximity to the intersection and keeping approaches like that away from that intersections.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Any other concerns with this item?
No concerns here.
Okay. Any additional comments from the applicants?
Thank you. Again, Andrew Schrank with Highlands Engineering. Just to clarify some of the access and make sure, so the main access between lots 1 and 2, we've got an opening and we have a non-access line that's shown on the plat there, and we have an opening that would line up directly with the hospital approach. And the intention would be, I guess if you're aware, when the hospital was built, they actually removed some of that median and created a left turn lane. We would plan to kind of mirror that on the east side of that intersection and do a similar turn lane that the hospital did to provide access between lots 1 and 2. And then the other access would be between lots 2 and 3. That would end up being a right in, right out due to the existing median that's there. You would only be able to come in from the, go heading eastbound and head out to the right as well. The one we would like to eliminate, based on staff comment, would be the northeast corner of lot 3. And if you want that one eliminated, I guess I would just recommend make that a condition of approval as it is shown on our preliminary plat drawing currently. Another thing that wasn't mentioned that we have done on this plat is on the west side, there was an existing 10-foot utility easement. The applicant went through and received signatures to vacate a 4-foot portion of that easement. So utility companies have signed off on that. And the purpose of that is to allow for additional buildable width. So we meet the 6-foot setback so we can build up to that setback line and not the easement line on the west side. With that, I guess I would stand for any other questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Schrank. Any questions for the applicant? Hearing none, we'll open this one for public comment as well. Any comments from the public, either here or online? Any additional comments? Hearing none, any final comments, Mr. Galbert?
I would basically just amend my most recent statement to when I said no concerns other than what I previously shared regarding the block length.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for staff or applicant? Any more questions? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of PLP 001 2024, State 9th Edition, as meeting all requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public safety and welfare, with the following addition of removing that northeast entrance onto Fairway. Across Fairway, I should say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schwab. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. And again, Mr. Frederick abstained. And with that, I'll turn the gavel back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bollinger. We will move on then on our agenda this morning. We move on to number 4. This is public issues of concern not on our agenda. If anyone in the public or online has any concerns they would like to bring up with the board today, this would be your time. Anyone in the public have any comments or concerns that were not on our agenda today? Hearing none, we will close that portion of our agenda. And then number 5 is items not on our agenda. This is, commissioners, if there's anything that you'd like to bring up that was not on our agenda this morning, this would be your time. Hearing none, we will move on. We have nothing scheduled for a work session today that shows, so last item this morning would be, I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.